Hello from Ski Instructor Academy, welcome back. Hey, I'm back with Jamie, so it's good news.
Hi guys,
what's up? It must mean the season's starting.
Season's here.
We might be in shorts, but there's a good reason for that, isn't there, why we're in shorts?
Yeah, we're going to be looking at boots today, I believe, Paul, so that's why I'm going all tropical with you today.
Yeah. Look, if you go and get your boots fitted, think a little bit about that, because one thing for certain about boot fit is that if you turn up in skinny jeans and a big pair of padded socks or something, it's going to affect the boot fitter's ability to get you rightly aligned, etc.
Yep, you're going to need to have something that you can roll up towards the knees, obviously you can get the boot on and off, no problem, and then you want a nice thin sock on, pair of tights, something like that, so the boot is as close to the skin as you can possibly get it.
Absolutely. So look, a quick history about ski boots. They've basically been designed from 2,500 years of skiing plus. And we've seen a sort of evolution through ski boot history, and it's certainly, there's been some big changes around about the 60s and 70s, etc., where we started to use different types of materials. Now, I don't want to get too into materials at this stage. It's something we'll probably do on either the end of this video or a later video. But one thing for certain was there are a lot of our staff, for example, that skied on leather boots. They were with the leather boots. It's unbelievable. And look, we've all seen this style of boot here with the toe thing that you might have seen on Elf, Jamie's favourite film.
Yeah, I've also got some leather for the weekends, so yeah.
So this boot was designed because it stopped that binding from slipping, basically from slipping back and forward, and they put this big hook on. So we eventually got round to Nordica and the plastic boot, which has seen things, develop rapidly then in the alpine skiing. But one thing, if we develop boots from the hiking industry, what we've seen is that meant hiking boots are basically designed to do what? To help and make it easier to go uphill. So a bit like when Jamie and I go ski touring, our bindings have a little step on them. And that step of the binding allows me to have an effect like a heel lift. And obviously if I'm going uphill, it can make it easier on the Achilles and the calves and make it feel more flat.
Yep.
Because of that is why it's concerning to us to think, well, we ski downhill. So this is quite a strange way to think about things. If you think about the fact that in your ski boots, there is a lift, quite a considerable lift as well, a heel lift. Yet, what is important, if you think about it, if I was going to walk downhill, would it not seem logical then that I would want to turn that lift around to make it easier to walk downhill? In other words, end up with the classic gas pedal. So you may have heard of this already if you've been involved in boot fitting, the gas pedal. And this is basically lifting the opposite way as opposed to what we have in our ski boots at the minute. So let's look inside the boot. Now, many of you, and this is probably what Jamie and I have experienced in our ski career, is as we have progressed and become more famous around skiing, we get more attention given to us because we bring a lot of business into the ski industry.
I think you just demand more attention.
Oh, we demand more attention. But, to get this style of attention that I'm talking about, if you think back 15 years ago, this would have been quite difficult for us to get as a normal recreational skier, for example, going into a shop.
Yeah, because, you just have no idea as well. So, you have zero idea what you expect when you go into a shop and you don't know that this is what boot fitting's about exactly. So you just expect, like you do when you buy a pair of sneakers or something, that you just go in, you pick a pair that you like the look of, you put them on, the length's right, the width kind of works, boom, I'm good to go. So
it's comfortability in the shop, really. And that's where the industry is aiming for. They are aiming to make a ski boot feel comfortable in the shop, so the ski seller, the ski boot seller, can get you out of the shop. That's the feeling I have. Look, it may not be true in every shop around the world, but let's think about it from a marketing point of view. You don't necessarily want 10 people to buy boots in your shop who are going to take up 10 days of time to fit the boot. You would rather have 10 people come in and within 2 hours, they're out the shop. And that is the turnover, that is the profitability of a shop, surely.
you're buying more of a recreational ski boot, if you are more of a recreational style skier, it has that more generalized fit, comfier liner, softer flex index, less forward tilt, less aggression. So I think it is designed for more you just happy holiday skier in general, whereas I think with this style of boot, because you are going to spend so much time on the hill, probably if you're buying something like this, you do need to make those, well, not everybody, I didn't make any adjustments to my boots for a long time. It's only been in the last 2 seasons that I've had to start making some changes due to injury and things. But yeah, I think you would need to be looking at some kind of changes if you're purchasing something like this, because it is such a narrow, compact, aggressive kind of liner shell.
Okay, well, there you are. That's sort of like a general opinion of what Jamie sees. We're going to look more in depth to this. So as you can see, what I've done first is I've put my foot inside this boot. This is just one of many boots that I own. And I've put my foot inside it. I've split the shell apart. Yeah, that's just age.
That little excess meat right there.
That's just age. Fat, fleshy feet. And from this angle, of course, as we look into the boot, we can see if the general form of the boot, before we do anything, is going to be, or it's going to work for me. So in this boot here, this has a last. And what we mean by that on these boots is the widest point here at the front is 97 on these boots. Whereas I can see Jamie's brought one of his pair of boots around, and the last here is 92. This is typical of, if we go into the high-end race models, the proper, World Cup race boots, you will generally see a last of about 92. And then you have these sort of hybrid race boots that have a last of 96, 97, and then into more recreational comfort boots, which can be 98, 100, 102, 104.
And yeah, more the middle-aged.
More middle-aged boots.
Race boots,
yeah,
on
more forgiving.
More forgiving, more comfy.
So if I am buying a 92 last boot like Jamie's, and I've used these in the past, I know straight away it's not going to fit. So do I turn around and go, right, that boot's not for me? No, not necessarily. If I was predominantly wanting to race, I would say, well, I need to adapt that race boot, and this is where I can start making adjustments that we're going to talk about. So,
and sorry to interrupt, but to be fair to myself as well regarding the Fisher boots, is I tried to go away from these boots several times and just never felt anything as performance-y for myself that worked as well for my foot. I've got quite a narrow foot and a skinny ankle, and I've got a really kind of hyper flexible ankle joint, so I just found that I needed something really stiff and narrow, nice and snug to work with my foot, so I could get the maximum kind of feel from the boot.
So I'm going to try to answer some of the myths, because Jamie's talking, I think, like a lot of you would talk about with boot fit. But maybe some of the things I'm going to tell Jamie today will make him second guess and think again about how he fits his boots this season. The first thing I'm going to look at is the easiest thing. I think most people understand, and Jamie's already mentioned it several times already, about this flex. What is this flex? What is this forward lean and flex cam? Well, Jamie's boots, actually, he's using a 150. Is that correct in that boot I saw?
Yeah.
Whereas I think this one here is 130. What I'm going to say first of all is almost dismiss that from your mind, because the way boot manufacturers have this flex number, it doesn't really make much sense to us as skiers, because that boot's going to change, and Jamie will verify this, when that's in the cold.
Yeah, when it's obviously up on the glacier -20, that is a solid piece of plastic, and then obviously when it's end of season plus 10 up there, it's super soft and pliable, so it's it just changes all the time. Obviously if I use it for a full season as well, the plastic softens over time, so the flex index would decrease, and it generally becomes a nicer boot to ski on, actually. And when you first buy one, it is pretty much a solid entity, but yeah.
Okay, so don't over stress about the flex count, but rather get in the boots, the different type of boots, and see what seems to work for you. But again, the issue is whereas somebody like Jamie or I could ski on 10 or 12 boots in a year and play around with them, okay, most people can't. They basically need to select a boot, and that's the boot they're going to have to live with. And I think that's the problem with a lot of recreational skiers. They buy a boot, they're not necessarily happy with it, but they've spent 400 or 500 euros and think, I need to live with this boot now.
Yeah, and I think people generally, and maybe that's the way you want to go for your ski holiday, is people choose comfort over performance. I would always go the other way around.
Yeah, that's typical. Yeah.
I prefer to be in pain and have the connection to the platform that I'm looking for. But again, it's most people are skiing for a holiday, so they want to enjoy that. They don't want to.
Which is interesting because what we tend to do when we have pain is we move away from pain. You know, like if you feel something painful touch you or stab at you,
towards it
you actually move away from it. But Jamie, he's a masochist. So we're going to look at ramp angle first, because that is the easiest thing I think to look at. Now, if we look at the setup in a general pair of boots, we're going to find the ramp angle is going to be somewhere between sort of 4, 5, 6 degrees. And what I've done here is replicated that ramp angle. And you can check this out yourself by measuring the ramp angle within the boot. What I have here is, in my boot, my ramp angle is going to be different because the boot's being worked on a lot. Do you know if your ramp angle's been changed, Jamie?
It hasn't been changed.
Can I have a look at your plate?
You can't take it out because it's screwed in.
The plate's been screwed into his boots, but we can measure the ramp angle, so let's do that. So we had a quick look at Jamie's boots, and it is very difficult to measure the ramp angle because I can't split the boot apart and he's screwed it in. But I'm guessing it'll be between 3 and 4 on his boots. What I did do was I took out my standard plate here from the shoe, and it comes in at about 4.5 degrees. Now, I have actually 2 plates. I also have one at 2 degrees. So I have 2 different plates, and I'm going to come on to why I've got that. This is me measuring the 2 plates here. And as I said, one of them is about 4.5 degrees, and the other one's about 2 degrees. And that's the ramp angle. It's really important that first inside Jamie's boot, he now has a lift, okay? So, when he puts his foot onto, in his boot...
Just to state, that's not my foot, guys.
That's not Jamie's foot.
Not my foot. That's
a fat, fleshy old foot. Yeah. When he puts his foot on, you can see there's a heel lift. And on top of that, do you have a footbed in?
Yes, I've got.
Yes, he has a footbed in.
Pretty much the same one as that.
Okay, so he's using a boot dock footbed.
My arch is higher.
And he has a very high arch. That's going to take him into a more pitched forward position. Now, in the last sort of 30 years, people have naturally ended up more and more forward. When I do a lot of these lectures in a gymnasium, for example, and I'm speaking to people, I'll have them in bare feet, for example, a lot of people don't even know that they're slightly leaning forward. Okay, I'm exaggerating a bit here, but this is because they're so used to having shoes on that actually have a heel lift in them. And that's why sometimes when we put our ski boots on, it feels a little bit more natural because there is this heel lift. And I'm going to come on to this drop, if you like, what we call it, in our running shoes, in our training shoes, and where it may and may not be necessary to have a footbed. So already this ramp angle is getting changed all the time. And on top of that, Jamie, what we've got to remember is, how does the binding and the ski affect it further? Now, I know Jamie skis several types of skis, but some of them will have race plates on, I know. And as a result, I don't know if even that's shifting him another 0.5 degrees into the forward plane. Now, when I'm standing on the ground, you're always searching for a sort of optimal balance. You naturally do it. Everybody has a natural stance, how they stand and how they can feel the tripod of the foot. Now, one thing that I've found when experimenting here with this is when I am pitching, in other words, heel lifted, I feel like I'm falling forwards for me because I tend to use a lot of either minimal shoes, so barefoot shoes, or I tend to use a very low heel lift. So as a result, as soon as I put something with a high heel lift, I do feel as though I'm getting pushed onto the balls of my feet. So when you see skiers, Jamie, a lot of the time, especially because you deal a lot with some good skiers in their 50s, 60s and 70s, Again, I think you often get people like this who have a burning sensation in the ball of the foot, or they feel like it's squeezing the front. But when you think about it, if they're constantly being pushed to the front, it would make sense that their foot's splaying out and basically putting a lot of pressure through the balls all day long, standing all day long, especially on a glacier where we often use T-bars, so you don't get to sit down. Does that make sense to you at this stage?
Everything makes sense so far, Paul. I'm right with you on this one.
Good.
Let's keep it
now,
going.
as we get to the other side of things, the gas pedal side that Jamie was, asking about, and this is where I've now got the 5 degree going the opposite direction. So this is on the ground, this is canted, and this is the opposite direction. At this position here, I feel like I'm falling back, obviously, because I've been lifted at the toes. I get a sensation going this way. What does that make me do? Well, that makes me want to do hinge forward with my upper body. And a lot of the modern day skiing is hinging forward with the upper body. Whereas this position here makes me feel like I want to push my butt back to balance. Okay, so this might be starting to make you think a little bit about this. Because my boots that I have set up here are only at about 2 degrees, the ramp angle is very, very low, I've simulated a 5 degree ramp angle in the boot, because this one here is only at about 2 when I'm flat on the ground. Interestingly, at the cuff angle, it doesn't really change me where my shin angle is. They're all about 72 degrees here. But look at the upper body position between where I'm at 5 degrees, Jamie, and where I'm at 2 degrees. So if you look at the angles, we can now see them clearly. Oh, I'll just go back one frame because I want to also look at how my pelvis is tilted at this stage as well. So this is this anterior motion of the pelvis as well, and posterior, so that we feel that we have the ability to be careful as to what we're doing. We don't want to be in this position, and equally we don't want to be too tucked under. But once again, this canting's creating this lifting, sorry.
Well, are you forcing this position? Is this your natural position?
No, what I did was I actually took these photographs with Julian, and I didn't think about them. I looked at them afterwards to see what they looked like. I didn't know what they were going to look like. I didn't sit there. But Jamie knows that I ski with a relatively neutral spine. And it comes from gymnastics, weightlifting, and in sport, where I'm quite protective of the spine. Whereas, you get a lot of people very rounded in the lower back and spine.
What Paul has is, Paul's very, very athletic and very strong. I know he doesn't look it. But he is very athletic, and he has the ability to use strength a lot of time. Obviously, phenomenal skier, great technique, but he can rely on the fact that he is extremely strong, so he can use that a little bit more where the pelvis is slightly further back than most other skiers, and get away with it, and still, make the ski really work well.
That comes again to what we're aiming to get across. The message is who are you? How do you, are you, if you take a pair of boots, and a good example of this would be, if I take a pair of boots and I get a foam injected liner, or look, I'll not go into all the different types of liners, but you can buy a boot, throw the liner away, and then get some fantastic World Cup specialized liner, made for you, and you ski 3 weeks a year. You then go away in the summer and wear flip-flops, and you eat a bit much. You come back, that boot won't fit. The boot.
Does all your weight go to your feet during the summertime?
Well, it does. Your feet will expand, and you only have to expand a little bit, and you only have to expand a little bit when you're fitting the boot like that.
Yeah.
There's no forgiveness in a World Cup style fit. It's not meant to be. There shouldn't be any forgiveness, because they want everything to be absolutely perfect for that day, even. And even in the season, they may change them. So be aware of that. If you're going one of these people who's spending fortunes on all types of special power straps and special linings and things, you may watch this video and actually think again about that.
But it's interesting when you see people on the hill, like race coaches who are on the hill all day, every day. They wear touring boots.
Yeah.
They wear great skiers.
They're not wearing World Cup
former racers probably spend their whole childhood, youth, career, maybe in something like this, but then when they're actually on the mountain teaching, because they're standing around a lot, they're in super comfy, super flexy touring boots. They're not designed really to spend. They're designed for that one fast run through the race course. They're not designed to be on the hill all the time. I break mine a lot during the season. I crack the boot shocks. I think it's just not used to being used so much, and the difference in temperatures throughout the season and stuff like that. I think they are really designed for 10 runs a day. And
so Jamie's hit on something really important that I would have got onto anyway in the video is be careful of pushing yourself into the best. This is the best race boot ever. But hang on a second, are you the best skier ever as well? Because that boot has been designed for phenomenal skiers. The 0.0001% of the ski industry. You need to think about that carefully. Look, I've talked already about ramp angle and about footbeds, etc. Now, for the last 5 to 6 years, I've been harping on about footbeds, and I don't like them. I don't have people wear them. I don't agree with it in 99.9% of cases. People don't need these footbeds put in when they run, when they walk, when they stand. There are occasions.
Check to see if there's a footbed in there.
There are occasions where somebody has severe plantar fasciitis or something, some serious problem with their feet that they may, because they can't get out of bed in the morning, need to have something put in it. But I even did a video of this years back where I discussed how that is properly done with a footbed and how the footbed isn't designed to support, but it's designed to retrain the feet. That's different. Now, the lift, the heel lift we're talking about. Now I want to show you this. When I'm lifting in weightlifting, there's a reason why I am using, Jamie, could you give me my weightlifting boot? This is a rare occasion where I actually do have a heel lift. It's about 24 millimeters, I think, on this one. That's quite a chunk. And we know when people, for example, need help to get into a correct squat position. So, well, Jamie, you could do a squat because you're in a nice position. Jamie's got subtalar neutral, his toes pointing forward, and he squats into the hole and down. When he gets into this position, when I get clients into this position, I'm a happy chap. But most clients look different, don't they? They'll end up either doing this with their heels, or they'll end up pitching forward as they squat down seriously into this position. They'll spin their toes way outside. They'll cave their knees in. And the first thing that makes sense is there's probably a range of movement issue somewhere, and it's normally either in the ankle or the hip. Okay, the knee is sort of at the mercy of the ankle and the hip. It's stuck between the two, but it tends to pick up the slack and pick up the injuries too. Now, this heel lift is in effect just assisting my tight ankles. But I don't have tight ankles, but yet in this video you see me use a heel lift, and that's because I want a more upright body because of often lack of shoulder mobility to be able to place the bar directly over my head. Because with that much weight, if it's not in perfect alignment, it's either going to fall backwards or it's going to drag me forwards. So as a result, we use a heel lift. And this is exactly what you're doing in skiing. But again, I have to think about this as to how upright do I want my body to be when I ski. I've shown before in other videos, and when you come on a course with Ski Instructor Academy, for example, how we go around getting some idea of your range of motion. And Jamie mentioned it at the start. He said, I have a lot of range of movement in my ankle. And I can guarantee he's probably got more range of movement than I have. And I have probably a lot more range of movement than many other people have, probably 80-90% of the market. But why then are boots designed in the way they are for basically one person's forward lean level? The best way I can measure properly the range of movement is normally I would put Jamie on the floor, lie on his belly, and I would put him into subtalar neutral. Myself, I would lift him up. I'm just going to take him into subtalar neutral because what I'm concerned about is he has a tendency to be rolling in this direction here. I want to put him into subtalar neutral, and I just want to see what his range of movement is. Now, this is here 0 degrees, let's say, And normally we would want to see, you know, 5, 6, 7 plus degrees. But in the case of Jamie, you can see in this position, he has loads of ability to dorsiflex. And he mentioned it before. Now, I would suggest most of you won't have that. In fact, if you're in your 50s and 60s, a lot of people I deal with and Jamie's dealt with, we sometimes see zero mobility in dorsiflexion, and maybe it's 2 or 3 degrees.
Yeah, we see usually like we take people into the gym who are struggling on the hill and just have a little look at what's going on off the mountain on the dry land, and you can just see that their feet, their ankles, their hips, they've got some kind of impingement there, that there's some kind of lack of mobility within those joints, and if you can't do it on the dry land, you're not going to be able to do it on the hill, so you're probably going to make some kind of compensation.
I think what Jamie said there, maybe we'll say it again, if you can't do it in the dry land, you can't do it on the hill. Why? Because it's a moving platform now, it's got a speed element added to it, and if you can't have a range of movement just standing still, how on earth do you expect that to suddenly appear in the mogul field?
Yeah.
It's not there. And you can improve mobility over time.
But generally you could get away with skiing down the mogul field, something like that, but you'll be making an incorrect movement. And it's not meaning that you wouldn't be, could be like a phenomenal skier. We know some guys who are phenomenal skiers, ski the bumps really well and have zero ankle movement, have literally got, you know, no range of movement in that ankle joint. But their skiing, you know, it's great skiing, but they spend probably a little bit more time out of balance than someone who would have better mobility in their ankle joint, who could stay more centered on that moving platform.
But we already know if they've got no range of movement, it's not that bad because we're cheating the system. We're cheating the system. So the question is this cheating of the system, you know, do you need it? So Jamie's just told us look at Jamie's range of movement compared with mine, for example. If we both, just on the video, we're going to both go into subtalar neutral, we're both going to have a strong foot arch, which I'll come on to. And we're both just going to allow our knees to start tracking forward as far as they can go without our heels lifting. So our heels remain down. And I think you'll see on the video, trying to beat Jamie. It's his birthday today and I'm trying to win still. His has probably got a lot more range of movement angle. The shin angle is probably much more than my shin angle. But once again, that has a bearing on the boot. I need to think then you know, what's the effect of that range of movement? Socks and things I'm not going to get into when we discuss ramp angle, but I do want you to be aware that I know people go on and on about socks. We're not. We just wear thin compression socks. You could get away with tights, but one thing for certain is do not add more foam and sponginess, i.e. hiking socks, big fluffy socks, anything like that is no-go in skiing. You want it to be as thin as possible, and that's why, you know, people even wear tights.
I think, and for people talk about cold feet, I think for circulation as well. Obviously, the thicker the sock, maybe it creates a snugness in the boot as well, but that can hinder circulation, it can stop the blood flow being as good, so it can make your feet colder rather than warmer. And like what's it called? Like a flight sock.
Compression sock,
because it aids the circulation of blood in your feet, so it keeps them nice and warm and it gives you a lot of feedback.
And they don't slip.
Yeah,
they don't slip. So look, how do I make corrections to forward lean then? Okay, before we move on to the next topic is how do I do that? Well, there's lots of ways. In my case here on my boot, what I have is I've already told you. I told you when you see the picture was I have the standard sort of 4.5 degree bed or plastic sheet here, but I've also got one ground down to 2 degrees. Again, we're very lucky we get equipment thrown at us and we can mess around with it. So as a result, I can, in the first weeks of the season, have a little bit of a play to see how I feel. And secondly, after I've gone to grinding that down, which is fairly easy, I can have attachments and things made at the heel. So what I've opted to do is, for example, here I've got a 3 milli plate here and a 2 milli plate at the back here. And because I have grounded and adjusted everything, I've had to also screw on something at the back here. Be very careful, don't start just grinding things out because your binding won't fit and you're basically going to be very unsafe if you do that. So changing that side of things, and you can see it closer up, you can see how there's been a plate put on, how there's a metal plate because of the grinding. You can see where it's been ground at the back here. These type of adjustments aren't easy to get, would you argue, Jamie, or not, for a recreational skier, for example?
I think the beauty is if you're in resort for a season and you can work with a good shop, is you've got enough time to make adjustments over time. And because, like I said earlier, I feel like you want to make those adjustments to the minimum, so you're getting as comfortable or as snug a fit to your foot as possible. And I think that's the beauty of getting something in resort and being based in resort, which most people aren't who buy ski boots. So yeah, I think it's to get that personalised touch. I think it's not necessary unless you are going to spend the full season on snow and going to be working with a good shop who knows
whether it's necessary or not. We'll come on to,
or not
but
necessary. Yeah.
We'll go on. Look, this is the other thing that people obviously always ask us is about the canting of the boot as well. And I'll come on to the canting of the boot when I start talking about medial and lateral and movements, how your foot sets with your foot arch, etc. So you can now see the setup of my boot quite clear and how I have combined the forward lean change by using a combination of little shims and attachments at the bottom, and also inside my foot as well. At this stage, I will point out I don't use any footbed, and I haven't done for a while. As I've said before, I don't feel that it's necessary for me, but what we have to understand, I'll get onto foot arches. I have a whole thing about that next. I'll explain more about that. Sorry, Jimmy, you wanted to...
I didn't actually want to say anything, but I can say something. Just regarding boots, what I find being on the hill, I'm on the hill most out of all of our trainers, is that what I generally see with the boots is people, our students see us skiing on these kind of race boots and stuff like that. And I probably would have been the same back in the day when I was first coming into the industry, and you want to get a set.
You want the best.
You want to, you want to be like the people who inspire you in the industry. And then if a boot is too stiff for you in the shaft, you just generally hit the front of the boot and you get kicked to the back. And you can never find the ski tip, you can never find the front of the platform because of that, because
it's just stop there, Jamie. That's very important what Jamie's just said. What he said to you was that if if you're not able to cope with that stiffness, it's just gonna.
It's like I said.
So the next thing to just finalise off the forward lean thing before I forget, I took a picture of the gel pads, that you put on your shin, for example, because some people, get that shin problem. They go, my shin's killing me. There's a pressure point. That is often to do with the fact that the shaft alignment, it doesn't align properly. So imagine if the boot is if you put Jamie's foot into the boot and you imagine that Jamie's shin, his tibia here, it pushes there, but he's got a huge gap lower down before the instep. So what he's getting is a pressure point where this plastic is. What he needs to do is find the right angle of the instep up over so everything connects again together. Otherwise, this is why people end up buying these. And if you're buying one of these, you're probably buying it because your boot's badly fitted somewhere. I can see also, and I'm not going to go too much into it, but Jamie's got further advancement in his forward lean because he's got a spoiler on. Which is going to...
It took me years to find the perfect position for that. Yes.
Pull it off. He's going to be pushed even further, forward. And secondly, I can see that he's had something done to the inside where they've stuck on some neoprene style material. And why was this, Jamie?
That's just because it's a boot that I had for the season. It was just to lock my ankle in more. Keep my ankle in place more.
Well, it's trying to push you back over.
I've got feet that are slightly different. So I've got one, my right foot's half a size smaller, so I feel like my right foot does this inside the boot a lot. So it's just to secure the ankle, the heel in place.
What's great about Fisher boots is that it comes out. And because it comes out, I can show you why we have to be very careful about this. This here has a tremendous amount of spring in it, actually. And once again, this, as it's coming together, is wanting to reset into this position. My argument would be is if I was Jamie, I wouldn't have had so much material put on here. Okay, he might have needed something on the top here to maybe hold him down because he's got, as you can see, his feet are fairly low. But I would be very cautious of wrapping it all the way around here and what effect that might have on the tongue of the boot. Indeed, some boots, like full tilt boots, etc., they're using the tongue is to control the flex, you know, how much flex there is in a full tilt boot. So it is important we're aware of the lining as well. And Jamie will be able to tell you a story of how my boots looked maybe 10 years ago, where I would completely cut out the lining at the sides and then go as far as cutting out the plastic shell at the side.
Yeah,
actually have that foot hanging out.
So you didn't understand why that was, so now you probably do as to why you're getting pressure points.
Which is weird. I skied, and this is no joke, I actually had a bit of a Bunyan spur coming on.
With a golf ball on the side of his foot. Basically.
Yeah, golf ball sort of thing. And you know, you first of all you go back and they blow it out and they put a footbed in.
They've actually shaped your boot there already for that.
I've had this done, yeah. And then what happened was it still wasn't good enough. So then I tried to create a donut inside the lining of the boot. That didn't work, so I just cut the lining out, got rid of that. That was better, but it didn't work. You know what I ended up doing? I actually cut out the plastic here, completely cut it out, and just let my foot hang out for that season. I've never skied better. I felt great.
That's because you used to ski back then. That's how it was for them.
That's the extreme. So the one thing that you can adjust first, and we'll come on to this when we talk about other things, is the lining. Because you yourself can start to cut and manipulate your lining, but obviously doing what Jamie spotted straight away was some of the modifications I've had done to my boot. And one of them that I'll come on to with the navicular, etc., is going to be important for you to understand. So we're not going to go into the bones of the foot too much. It's not really important for you to know the 26 bones. But there are some of them that are very important because we've already touched upon the arch of the foot. And when we talk about the arch, there are actually three, there's not actually one. We all are obviously very aware of the main one. You know, we see it. You know, Jamie said he's got very high arches. But has he got transverse arch or not? And this is where the issue becomes. I'm looking, this is the one he's referring to. But the one I'm looking at is the arch at the front of the foot. So when you look at the foot straight on, you know, has that foot actually got a bit of an arch going on? And this is very, very important for us when it comes to the rotational plane. The other bones that you want to be aware of, the navicular and the subtalar joint, are very important. The navicular is a very important bone because it's basically responsible for that arch. It's the thing that actually holds up that arch as well, and it's responsible for the pronation. Now in skiing, you know, this movement here, Jamie, that you teach your guests to pronate, okay, if the navicular is blocked, then you end up in a situation where you've almost got like, I don't know, like imagine my fist and I couldn't adapt my wrist. I couldn't actually do that with my wrist. And if I wanted
so much tension in those wrists.
Yeah, if I wanted to move like that, I can move. That's like a macro movement. But if I want to make micro movements, I'd want to use my wrist, for example. But if I can't, that's like the same in your foot. If you can't use your navicular, you end up with a club foot. Your foot can't do this action, which Jamie will argue is super important because, let's face it, edging is grip. And if you can't edge and make micro movements like you talk about, and you've just got a big club foot, then yes, that's possibly because the shell of the boot is basically pushing against your navicular. So if we look at this boot here, you can see where I've given it to the boot fitter and been drawing on it to tell him that I want space punched out where the navicular is, and I want space here on my heel bone. Now I don't have, you're quite got bony prominence, haven't you? Like sticky out, do you have
the way I'm standing.
Do you have sticky out bits on your heels, or do you find that's all right with you?
I've got, I would say, I don't know, like what's,
So you doesn't
what's
bother
normal?
No, it doesn't bother you then, because a lot of people, of course,
Is that
have
normal?
big sticky out bits.
Bust that ankle a few times.
And because of that, you're going to have to create space, because bone on plastic is not very nice. And of course, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get rid of as much sponginess as well. So if you look at most liners, they're all foam, for example, okay? And that's not really very nice. The shore level of foam is not very good. So when I'm talking about shore, I'm talking about hardness. So we need to discuss foot arches, because obviously this is a bit of a controversial topic. Now Jamie knows that I'm very much against footbeds, but I must admit, I have used them for a long time in skiing, because it was one of the few sports where it sort of made sense from what I was getting told by people. However, when I went off and did my own research and actually started to trust my own thoughts on biomechanics, I actually ditched the footbed a while back, because I realised that it was not actually helping me. I'm not saying everybody's the same, but of course if you go into a ski shop, Jamie, can you tell us the general, the sort of boot fitters thing when he's talking about footbeds and why they're selling them to you?
Create more space. So if you have discomfort, if you have that burning sensation maybe that you spoke about around the ball of the foot, it'll take that away apparently. So let's get a footbed in to create a more nice snug fit, but also as well give you more control of your foot. A lot of the times what they're saying in the shop, that you'll have more feel and more response from the foot.
When you roll in these directions, for example?
Like edging movements, so just more connectivity to the boot, I would say. It gives you that more solid feel of what's going on underfoot.
So in a nutshell, it sounds like a good sell, and you would be thinking to yourself, that 50, 60 euros for a custom fitted insole, footbed, seems to be a good idea. It's going to give me more connectivity, it's going to give me more space, it's going to give me more ability to get onto the edge, responsive. I'm not so sure, okay, and I ditched it, and to be honest, since I've ditched it, I've felt the opposite. Why? Well, first of all, when we look at arches, and they're not just one, there's three. Obviously most people are looking at is this main arch. Jamie said it before, you've got a high arch, yeah?
High-ish, yeah.
So he's got a high-ish arch. But there are three, and the three really are being helped to stay in position through the navicular. Okay, so I don't want to go through too much anatomy, but I do want you to be aware of the subtalar joint underneath the talus and the navicular, because the navicular is responsible really for that arch and pronation. Now, if we think about it, we're talking about the tripod of the foot, and everybody should have heard about this. First, fifth, and heel. The ability to be on a good tripod is extremely important in most sports.
Have you sent it?
I would add to that, the integrity of the foot depends upon tension, tightness and stability. Jamie, you're constantly telling your guests this about their feet and ankles. It's not about ankle flexion rather than ankle tension. This is really important that your guest is not got what you said before, the floppiness.
Yeah, not flopping around.
To the mic.
Yeah, let's do that one again. Because that's not 100% what I say all the time, but yeah, let's go do that one more time.
So we're really interested in the tripod of the foot, and I'm sure everybody's heard something about first, fifth, metatarsal, heel, the tripod, building a strong foot, etc. This is the importance. And Jamie would add to that and say, well, we need to have tension, tightness and stability in our feet. Okay, that's really important. You say it to your guests all the time when you're working with ankles and feet, yeah?
Yeah, I think it's trying to move with load. You're gonna have feelings of light and heavy within the turn, but I think it's trying to have that. We speak a lot about that, this neutral pressure throughout the whole turn. So I think that's what the tension is there. It's just like when you're moving, it's not just being light and floppy. It is that you're making that maybe it's that same movement, but it's movement under load all the time, because then you have more connectivity with the platform and the ground, I would say.
Connectivity, yeah.
Will be my way of thinking of it.
Yeah, so connectivity. He keeps coming on to that. I put that word in before he even mentioned it. But connectivity is really important. So I used to do an exercise about 10 years ago when I was teaching, and I would talk about, imagining you're skiing but you don't have a binding holding you in. That you have to remain in a position that feels like you're not relying on the binding. And secondly, you're not relying on the cuff. So the other side of it, I would play a game called Operation. If you remember as a kid, you used to have to pick the bones out of the human body, and it would go if you touch the sides. Operation. And that was another thing about the shaft, that I didn't want people just leaning on the shaft or using the shaft in any direction. I wanted them to feel that they were using their muscles and skeletons, their tendons, their muscles, sorry, I'm speaking half, I think it's German, Muscheln, their muscles and their tendons and their ligaments to be connected, rather than just use the boot to think they're connected in some way, and the binding as well. And that's why, that idea of almost feeling that you are connected to the ski without a binding, and you're bringing the ski with you in the turn, as opposed to just letting it go. So one of the things when we're teaching is we try to use analogies a lot, and we, especially when we can connect with somebody with a sport that they already do, and we can use an analogy to explain the movement pattern. Now, we've been using the word connectivity a lot, or I'm trying to get that across. And I already mentioned that when people are skiing, I don't like them relying upon the fact that they're pinned into a binding. They've got a plastic shell of a boot, which makes everything inert. And as a result, for the last decade, we've been saying to them, look, imagine you're skiing and you don't have a binding. You are, if you like, stuck onto this ski with some very loose magnet that would just snap off if you pull too hard to the side. So this way people start to bring their whole foot with the ski, as opposed to just leaning on the cuff in different directions. Now this connectivity, I'm going to use the analogy of a rowing machine, because when in strength and conditioning and fitness, etc., and I see more and more people using Concept 2 rowers, we've always tried to get people to understand that as we are making, eccentric and concentric movements, we need connectivity. So if you imagine, this is primarily a hinge archetype movement. It relies upon me, which is great because a lot of skiing, we've talked before about this hinging at the hip. So this archetype we use here, this is me squatting, and this would be me making the concentric movement pattern, and the eccentric of me pulling myself down into the hole, and the concentric movement pattern is what we're going to try and replicate here on the rowing machine, because I want people to understand about what we mean by unnecessary vertical movement to release or to start a new turn. And to get people to understand that, I'm using the analogy of the rowing machine, because most of you will probably come into the gym and you'll grab hold of the straps, you'll put your feet into the straps, you'll lock yourself down, just like the ski, the binding, and your boot. You've done exactly the same as what you would do when you ski. And now what I see people do when they're rowing is they make an unnecessary concentric push really, really far, which the only reason they don't end up going off the back of the rowing machine is because they're held in by these straps. And if I was to take the straps away and put them here, they find it very difficult to row because they're so used to being held fast, like in your ski bindings. So we teach people when rowing, and especially all rowers will tend to do this on the warm-up sets, is they won't actually use that strap like a binding to hold them down, and they will actually row eccentric concentric movement with no problem, because they're used to creating torque, and they're used to making the movement pattern that doesn't see them fly off the back of the seat here. So in skiing it's the same. If you are making a pop-up, that's even fine at times if you remain connected. If you want to make a vertical movement, for some reason you're on some sort of steep narrow and you have to make a little hop, fine. But don't disconnect as you make any type of vertical movement. And remember, most vertical movement is really vertical and diagonal. It's more getting forward and across the ski as opposed to just being up in the air. So here's a great analogy of the same thing as a binding and a ski and your boot. Imagine skiing and you don't have a binding, just like in this rowing machine as I did, and you have to feel connected. Even if you do make some forward upward movement, you remain connected. So that brings me on to the next subject of really emphasizing with connectivity, torque, tension, stability. So even in the weightlifting here, when we're doing a snatch, most people will perceive this as me pulling on a weight to trying to get it high enough that I can actually get it above my head. When actually what I'm really focused on is getting under the bar. And actually the bar is what I'm using to push myself underneath. Okay, and this is again a bit like skiing. I'm more conscious of my eccentric movement, my pulling myself down often, than I am worrying about going up. Because that's normally for most people going up is easier than going down. It's one of the reasons why, for example, when we're, you've got to have somebody with an injury, particularly when it's osteoarthritis or something like that, it's often easier people to go uphill than to go downhill, and that's to do with how much, the fact that you have a ramp again and you don't have as much pressure coming under your foot as you go up. But when you're running downhill, it's dropping away from you all the time. A bit like in skiing, the hill is dropping away from you all the time. Now when pulling a weight like this is how you see it, again an interesting part is we have this thing to say when the arm bends, the power ends. Because with as much weight as that, if I try to pull it with my arms, okay, I'm relying upon fairly small muscles. So what I do instead is I rely upon biomechanics and the fact that my arm remains long as I pull that up, and now I can use the posterior chain, I can use the big muscles of the legs, and I can bring the weight up with the arms straight. Because I know as soon as I do that, I lose the power, okay, it dissipates. So once I get the weight to there, my job is to get quickly underneath the bar to catch it. And that is about torque, tension, stability, and this is important in skiing, that when we are on our skis, okay, I keep saying this about the rowing machine, you have to have a sensation that you're connected to it, but not through the binding and not through your boot. Because if you do that, you have a tendency to switch off. Okay, a bit like being in a plaster in your arm or something. Your whole muscles go into atrophy because they're not doing anything. Okay, so we need to remain constantly connected all the time. Now, this brings me on to the levers, first class lever and second class lever. It's not massively important that you understand the physics and what exactly this means, first, second and third class levers, but be aware that they're in our body, and obviously levers, as many of us know, if we think of a first class lever and you think of a pair of scissors or a pair of pliers, a seesaw, all these levers have the fulcrum point in the middle between the load and the effort. Okay, that's the first class. The second class, the fulcrum point sits at the end here, and you can see the load is in the middle. Okay, now because the second class lever has the load in the middle, that's what makes a wheelbarrow so easy. When you load it with soil and you lift it up, you would not be able to lift that soil if it wasn't for you using a second class lever. So that tells us a story straight away to say, well, second class levers are very good in moving large loads over small distances easier than other levers. Indeed, the third class lever, which our body is generally full of, for example, your elbow, doing a bicep curl, this is a third class lever. They're quite inefficient levers, but there's a reason for them in the body and it makes more sense. We'll not go into that. I just want you to know when you ski, okay, a bit like standing on your toes is a second class lever, whereas if we go back to the first class lever, the first class lever, you can see it in the ankle joint, is inefficient in a lot of what we do in skiing. This would be this action that you see people do with their ski boots quite a bit, where my shin angle here is just, all I'm doing is flexing the F out of my boot, pushing my knee over my toe, and it's literally not really doing much in the sense of speed. So if we think that a second class lever in my ski boots is what I would be most likely to use in the mogul field, in short turns, would be more connected, because in the second class lever you can see how in the picture here, where the fulcrum point is, this is the action we make when we're making a short turn, and we want it to be a quick action onto the front of the ski, a quick pressurizing of that tip as we enter the turn. Whereas your first class lever, as you flex forward, would take a long time before eventually you could get any type of pressure to the front. It's almost like slow motion pressure. Now that might be beneficial under certain circumstances, like a very long turn, beginners, for example, who don't want that twitchiness of the second class lever. And that is why the boot setup becomes very important in that as well. A good example of a second class lever here from Gary skiing down, one of the trainers. This is typical second class lever skiing. And you'll see that to your eye, he's quite compact. He doesn't seem to have much vertical movement as he goes down. He remains relatively dynamic and stacked, very quick reaction and deflection from left to right. He would not be to do this if he had that unnecessary level or class 1 lever. It just wouldn't work. There'd be a lot more vertical movement you would see. When I watch Gunther go down, I see a little bit of both, a mix, a little bit of class 1, but primarily again, this is class 2. This is this lever that I'm talking about that has a high mechanical advantage. It allows you to move a lot of weight more efficiently than a class 1. That's very important in skiing, okay? And it's important therefore that you understand the difference between just flexing your boot and pushing your knee over your toe, and the difference between being connected and feeling a torque that you bring your heel with you as you make the movement pattern. Now, if you look at a classic hop turn, this is a classic second class lever in action. And the second class lever, what it's doing is it's loading up the gastrocs, the soleus, your Achilles tendon into your foot, and it has a lot of spring to it in effect here. And this action of elasticity, okay, is really important in skiing again, and you want to be to tune in with this with your boots. So if your boot seems to be setting up to give you more of a first class lever feel, then, you know, this is something that you may want, as I said before. Here when I watch Gunther on a very steep black doing a longer turn, here you don't want the ski to be so twitchy. So a good analogy of this is that when you, for example, you're biking, if you had a bike that was undersized for you, handlebars, were short, not very long in this direction, the bike can feel twitchy. So on race bikes, again, when coming downhill, if the bike's too twitchy, you know, you could obviously have an accident. And the boot, if it's set up in a certain way, will feel more twitchy. In other words, it'll pressure and grab the tip faster than a boot that's set up a different way that will feel more progressive. So we have to think, again, it's a question, do you want a boot that feels more progressive to the tip? And that could be a big advantage with longer turns. Or do you want a boot that's set up to hook and to grab quicker? Okay, and that's where you see it now clearly on the presentation. If I have a high ramp angle combined with less forward lean, then what I'm going to see is this would be beneficial for a beginner, because this 10 to 12 degrees added into this ramp angle here, it's going to make it much more vertical on the tibia, and as a result, the class 1 lever It's going to be used a lot on this type of boot, and it will be more progressive. And that can be, as I say, for a beginner, better because it doesn't suddenly grab. In the beginner, it gets shot to the tail. Interestingly, this, well, not quite this, but almost this setup could be used by World Cup racers. But they would be using this for their giant slalom, their Super G, etc. Big turns. You wouldn't see this setup in a slalom skiing system. Well, slalom skiing is very tight turns, okay? And this would be more big turns. So with a low ramp angle combined with more forward lean, so my boots are about 15 to 16 degrees on the forward lean, then what we're going to see is, especially if the ramp angle, I'll just go back one frame, if the ramp angle's been ground down a bit, so instead of being 3 to 4 degrees, maybe it's only 1.5 or 2 degrees in the ramp angle, then this is going to favour this quicker, snappier turn. Okay, and you'll find most of these boots can be set up like this when you buy them with a 96 last or a 95 last, something, this mid-range boot. So a 92 last, these real high-end racing boots will also probably come with a forward lean around about 15 degrees. And just be aware, again, I'm not telling people what to buy, I'm just making you aware that because in circumstances when I'm making, let's say, long turns like this, when I'm skiing down, my aim in a long turn is to be able to use the biomechanics of my skeletal frame to hold the almost, this will be about 2.5 to 3 Gs when I'm going round the turn, which means, 3 times body weight. I can squat a lot, but 3 times my body weight, probably not. But if I can get a long outside leg, so I can get my leg long enough, I can use my skeletal frame, the biomechanics, to line up properly, and in this way I can then hold the force of the turn. But the question would be, is if there's too much forward lean in the shaft of the boot, then what can happen is I might not be able to straighten this leg enough, because as I try to straighten my outside leg, my calf, especially if I've got quite juicy calves, might hit the back of the cuff and prevent me from straightening this leg as much as I would like to in the long term. So this is why the boot setup becomes, sometimes for high-end racers, they may have several ways that they set their boot up depending on what they're doing, and depending on the conditions of the snow, for example.
You start to tune into your feet and the ground and that connectivity between yourself and the platform, which I think sometimes just gets taken away. Sometimes when you fasten things up or pull that strap on the rowing machine, you don't really think about your feet.
Can I ask you, do sometimes guests ski better when their boots are undone?
100%. But I think for me...
can I just go back though, because you're talking about a snug fit, but Jamie's just openly admitted that the general recreational skier will ski often better when their boots are undone.
Yeah, but that's because when I ski, because I've skied a long time, not being arrogant, is I have those micro movements inside the boot. I'm tuned into my feet, I'm skiing with my feet. Whereas the guests are skiing with something higher up the chain, and you can't do that when the stability of the boot's taken away from you. You have to tune into the platform or to your foot. And that's what they start to do. They start to make the micro movements, and it creates patience in the turn as well. Whereas previous runs before that, they were just throwing large masses around, and they could get away with it because the boot was stable, so they didn't need to create stability themselves. So I think it's for me, one of the best exercises at any level. Well, not too low down, maybe get a few weeks under your belt first, but it's one of the best.
This movement, and that is what we should be doing in skiing, is controlling eccentric and concentric with tension, stability and torque. Okay, coming back to the arches, we all know how important arches are. We see them everywhere, whether it be in bridges, the obvious things, or in your rib cage.
Could have put the time bridge on there, dude.
Good. Or your ribs, or whatever it might be, parts of the body you see it as well. But one thing's for certain, I was saying this, and if you look at some of the earlier lectures from 6-7 years ago, I would keep saying to people, if I develop an arch, and it's, the engineering side, we know from physics, etc., how strong and powerful arches can be, why on earth would I then stick a strut here down there. It doesn't make any sense to put a strut, another support there. Why do I then do that in the foot? Why do I take my foot and then block the arch where the river is flowing through? I now take away that space. The argument being, as Jamie said in the shop, oh, it's going to transmit that power more direct into the ski. But I've just removed my ability to pronate naturally, okay, in the way that the human body is designed to do. I would argue, and I feel it now, that I have now blocked my navicular, okay, and made it very difficult to use the subtalar joint and to pronate my foot, where these micro adjustments are very important as well. Instead, what I've found is in this position here, I'm actually blocked. I actually don't feel the same movements, okay? Furthermore, I would add this bit at the back as well, okay, so this is where I was talking about the navicular, and this bit at the back with the cup. I've noticed this happen more and more over the last few years, that they start to really create a cup around the calcaneus and the heel. So, the calcaneus it's not a flat bone, it is a round bone, so they think, that fits into there perfectly. But this U-form, this cup underneath, okay, and here's somebody saying, look how wonderful it is, I've straightened this person up. My thing is very important. I deal with people on a strength and conditioning side is I try to get them to strengthen their own feet up, because we're all capable of doing it. If we start standing a bit more on our bare feet, we start sensing and strengthening our arches and strengthening our feet, we won't need these types of heel lifts and these footbeds. So be very cautious, because if I, pin, and Jamie likes this, he says it a lot, and I've heard him say it over the years, he likes to feel that his heel's locked in.
I like just to feel snug in general in every aspect of life, really. I'm a snuggler, I like a cuddle, so yeah, I like anything like that.
Well, my argument would be is maybe giving Jamie some freedom, and we've said it before, not like buckets of space, like it's ridiculous, he's flopping about, because he doesn't want that. But giving him certain articulations that he hasn't had for for a while, giving them back to him, because Jamie does have strong feet. Jamie does, have the necessity to be able to maintain a good subtalar neutral position.
I think everything you're saying is obviously really good as well, but I think it's you're talking about athletic people who have, you're saying, good feet, good this, good that, awareness of this, high level, and what about Joe Public? Because
exactly.
Those things would work there.
This is where
maybe don't have the range of movement, the strength.
I did criticise a little bit boot fitters online with podcasting, so I'm going to criticise them, but I just said that there's not many good ones. That's what I sort of said, but that's like ski instructors. There's not many good ski instructors, But the issue being is, in fairness to them, they're not with you on the hill. They also don't know you. They don't know what your sporting background is or your lack of sporting background is. They don't know if you've gone from 70 kilo this year up to 80 kilo. They don't know what...
And those bad instructors obviously haven't trained with Ski Instructor Academy.
Obviously not.
Anyway.
Just as quick, I'll have to now put a product placement.
Please do.
I'll have to, on the monetization of the channel, I'll have to
please.
actually say that this has now got a sponsor on it. So, what we're trying to get people to do is to be aware that we want integrity of the foot. But if you can't get that, just be aware that a footbed will take you from your tripod of your foot and disrupt it. It will disrupt it, it will change the mechanics. Not to think of it as pressure points, Jamie, but just as a tripod, rather than pressure points, because pressure will change. The center of pressure is what we're talking about when we ski. Okay, so people talk about
points of contact, let's say then.
They're the normal points of contact. Before we start loading medial laterally, before we turn a ski, all I'm saying is if you're standing on the ground, these are the tripod of the foot. This is what it's going to do before you even move.
But would that not be? It's just being playing devil's advocate. Would that
Jamie's right.
I mean, if
you are suffering from cramps in your feet, you have issues with being too far forward or something like that, too far back, then footbeds, people think, they're going to make sense. I disagree. I would say not. I would say that we need to start re-establishing our optimal balance position on the ground with nothing, as we are now. It's natural to do this. If you look at how Jamie stood through the whole lecture, he's adopted the sort of pose like this.
I've just actually adopted this since you spoke about how fine my feet were earlier on, so showing them off to their full extent.
Well, we can wind back and see it actually, but he's tended, this is just how it is. But for this position, is quite common, because I tell people as well, when they're standing all the time, you get tired. But actually lifting the foot up and just putting it like this relieves that stress.
Like this a lot.
Or stand like the tree, yeah. So be aware of the contacts of your feet. Remember, this lecture is about not me telling you, now I want you to blow out your navicular, I want you to shave this off, it's to do what Jamie said. Do everything, maybe tiny little bits, and start looking at small changes over the next 5 seasons that you can make, even to the point of strengthening your feet. Okay, would be a change. So how do you get there? Well, you find a good boot fitter. It's not easy. Okay, I've said this before, because the big problem with a lot of boot fitters is they're under pressure. They're having to deal with loads of people through the peak season, and they've got to make money. The shop's got to make money, etc. And so you sometimes feel a bit embarrassed if you're taking up a lot of time in the shop, but you shouldn't. That's the first thing. Don't feel embarrassed about taking up time in the shop.
I think as well, when you're coming into it for a long time, you don't know. You just, like you didn't know.
Well, no, in fairness,
so you don't know what questions you should be asking. You don't know how it should be feeling. You don't know. So
especially when people are telling you it can be uncomfortable. Or, tight fit people. Oh, it's cool. There's so many people. Yeah, that's what I go for. A really tight fit. Again, you're distracted almost, aren't you?
I think all these micro adjustments that you're talking about, one come when you're at an advanced level skier and you're working in the industry really. I think things like, if you are getting kicked back when you're hitting the front of the boot's possibly too stiff for you at your level and different things.
Or could it be that he's too far?
It could be that he's too pitched forward and different things like that. So I think it's looking at the technique side as well. It's talking to a trainer as maybe, and him looking at you as a skier. I'm now standing like this, as you can see.
But can I just point out that something really important here. Jamie can ski on my boots. Okay, completely set up for me, and he'll ski pretty well. I may whinge a bit at the bottom of the slope, I feel a bit this, whatever, but he'll ski really well. Unfortunately, Jamie doesn't need all this stuff as much as the average skier actually needs it, because we can get around problems because we're good skiers. Even when you get them crappy edges done, the edges are wrong, you still can ski. But the point is it not going to be a situation, Jamie, where it's even more important for the low-level recreational skier to have adjustments than it is for the high-level skier?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I'm 100% in agreement with you. Like, I think everybody should have a solid, good boot fit. But I think as well, it's if you're coming for a week a year, and you're coming for the up-brain, you're coming for I do 3 runs in the morning, I do this, and then I think it's just depends 100% what you're after in the industry.
If people have got this far in this video, they're probably quite serious skiers.
Yep. And then you would want to work with a good boot fit. My advice would be micro adjustments over time. It's all about the feeling. I think the good thing is actually just take the inner shell out of your boot, put your foot in, and feel where the pressure points, feel where the plastic's touching your foot, because that's probably where the pressure points are going to be when you go out and ski, especially when you get a new
logic.
boot.
See, Jamie's thinking logic, yeah.
And then you can mark that out with some, like Paul did. I think he did it himself. He marked out where he felt his pressure points, took his boot in and got the boot fitter to make the adjustments for him. So it's just like little things like that.
Feedback to the boot fitter. That's important what James just said. You don't need to know Anatomy 101 to give the boot fitter feedback, to tell him, I feel this, I feel that. Yes, okay, if we start talking about subtalar joint, navicular, and different tendons, you're going to need a little bit of knowledge. But I'm hoping you've got a little bit of that, of understanding. Is my pronation being blocked? So here what I'm doing is, I'm trying to point out to the boot fitter here that I feel that my big problem, Jamie's already mentioned it, because of coming from strength and conditioning, I know how to be in subtalar neutral. I know how to force it. I have to almost switch my brain off to show my discrepancies, because otherwise I'll just correct it. If the boot fitter says to me, just walk down there so I can have a look as you walk, I'll walk perfect gait because I know how to do it. But what he wants me to do is to be almost floppy and show my problems, if you like.
Your natural mincing that you
Yes.
do around the house.
Now, I already know anyway, and you can see me pointing it out, that how my left kneecap is, different to the right. It's pointing out over. And, Jamie, for example, as well, I can see he skis. He already said he's very clean skier because he's slightly bowed. So that has to be adjusted as well. And people ask me all the time, well, where do you adjust that from? The shaft? Or do you adjust the canton, the canton on the shaft? Or do you actually adjust from the ground, up over? Okay, so for me, you can see with these black dots on my knee that actually my left kneecap, it is slightly out over. We can see it now as I'm standing neutral on the left picture. In the middle picture, I want to point out that as I tilt to the little toe side, be very careful. So this is where Jamie gets into a little bit of trouble. The boot is designed in such a way that if I put Jamie in it, and I'll do this now, is it will topple, okay, this way very easy to the little toe side. But in this direction, it takes more driving force and torque to move the boot. So we put Jamie's boots on one foot, and now we're not put both on like I have here. So what you can see is, can you do it up, sorry, is in my case, as I'm moving to the little toe side, I'm being very careful that I don't just want to be pushing against this side. I don't want to feel that I want to feel that operation game I talked about, where I'm sort of centered and I'm using my foot to actually manipulate the boot. Big toe side, little toe side. So what I want Jamie to feel is if I tell him to go little toe side out, that way, you see what he did? He pushed against here straight away. Now, this is natural because he did it without actually connecting that much. He just tilted across, and it's easy, isn't it? Mm-hmm. This is why Jamie skis quite bow-legged. Now, if you can do the same again, but actually try to keep the distance there and actually feel like you move, it's quite hard to balance it a little bit, yeah? So you're almost balancing on that edge there. That's the torque we're looking for and the tension. He can do that, and I can look and actually see the boot, how the shaft is now, and see it's quite good fitted. If you go to the big toe side and do the same.
So not touch the shaft?
Not touch the shaft.
I'd have to focus on which way.
Which is easier?
Physically, it takes the same amount of energy. Focus-wise, more focus on this side. But I've just done it for the first time.
But is it not easy just to tilt that way like you did before? The boot wants to go that way, doesn't it? The boot is designed that way, Jamie. Okay, it's designed to go to the outside. You can actually, if you pick up your boot there, you can see it. And this is why boots are, they're generally, you can see how it's designed. Yeah, that width there is generally about the same width of a race ski in the middle. So this here is, you've got to get over this, and you just got to be aware that the little and big toe will have a different feel and effect. And it's much easier in ski boots to actually make this action. But just be aware that if you did what Jamie did at the first, where you just use the cuff of the boot to do it, what you're trying to train your guests to do is to have a connected movement as opposed to just going like this. And this is why when I watch people, ski instructors training people doing this sort of stuff, I always look at it and think, well, is that really what we want them to be doing? Like this, I said, do we really want them to be doing this? Okay, or do we want them to be using that class 2 lever? And in this direction, is this really what I want them to be doing? Okay, so a little bit of food for thought. So my question was, do I adjust then in the case of Jamie? So let's say if we look at his position and we see, that perhaps he has his knees moving slightly in here, do I just adjust the shaft to match that? Or do I adjust at the base so the whole boot is having an adjustment from the floor up over? Now I would say from my side, if it's an alignment issue where it's just his tibia that sort of bows out a bit, I would just adjust the shaft at first and just match the shaft to the alignment of his bone here. But if he is from the floor got a tilt in some way, then you know, like he is kipped in this direction or out, then you would probably want to make the adjustment from the ground up over them. Okay, so again, as I pointed out before, is Jamie tends to be able to stand. You know, he doesn't sort of collapse in like this, and he doesn't also look like this. So he's relatively neutral, and I feel any adjustment for him at first would just be involved in, you know, twisting or canting that shaft. Do you actually do that or not? Or have you not done that?
In the past, I've adjusted my shaft, but at the present, my shaft is straight up.
As it was bought.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's something that, again, you have to think about. Okay. So in my case, you know, I have made an adjustment to the shaft. Yes, but I have not actually adjusted from the ground up over. And remember, I don't have a footbed where an adjustment could have been.
Is that just for this season, or did you make this adjustment?
No, I made this adjustment previously. So why do we need access to this navicular and subtalar joint? Well, we already know the importance of critical edge angle in skiing. So this has been spoke about years ago, and we've done lectures on this before, about the fact that we need to have an optimal edge angle to be able to ski down the slopes. See one of our previous videos or something. Now, if we watch here, one of the girls going down in Argentina when we were skiing, she's a really good skier, Catherine, doing an exercise with Jamie on me or whatever, a classic double pole drag exercise. And, you know, you can see she's a good skier, and she does do ski racing, I believe. Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if she still does, but did.
Did, yeah. Okay. If we look at the critical edge angle, we can see it now. It's 104 degrees. So that's going to tell me straight away that she did have problems. This leg was just, you know, the harder she pushed, the more she fell inside of the turn because it wasn't at critical edge angle. But if we look at the knee, okay, remember I already said the knee is really at the mercy of the ankle and the hip. And we look down at the subtalar joint and down into the navicular, the ability to pronate, I can see it's blocked, okay? And that, to me, I would argue is, because she's, you know, come from a race background as well, with her race boots, that boot could have been the issue, okay? It could be the problem, and by creating the ability to pronate with her, she could have skied better.
I would say, for me, is I wouldn't be really necessarily questioning her equipment at that stage, or the task bone being blocked. My next task for her would be just get that stance in, get it narrow, because I feel like if you are wide and you start moving your mass inside the turn, the platform's going to remain relatively flat as hers is, whereas if your feet are underneath your hips and you start moving mass inside the turn, the platform's going to increase more as well as the hip moves inside.
So we'll assume that Ski Instructor Academy did its job as it always does, and we look at stance and balance as being one of our prime things.
Yeah.
And this was an issue of the ski drifting out. So in her case, she can stand on the ski, she can make a parallel turn, but I could see this in the low and high end, and especially in the plough turn, you know, when we're doing something real low. So this here, and again, a lot of people could focus into the knee and say, right, there's a lack of rotation from the knee, etc. True, but remember, it is at the mercy of that ankle and hip, and as a result, I would argue that it would be really good to look at what's going on, especially in the navicular, and seeing what footbed she had in there as well. Because when we're in Argentina, unlike when we're in Austria, we don't have the same access to people, materials, etc. And we tend to have people bring their equipment with them.
Yep.
And we rely upon the fact that that equipment's going to be relatively good. Whereas in Austria here, we control that much more because we're so concerned about badly fitted equipment. Like, you know, to the point of, I know there are some wonderful boot fitters in, I don't know, Holland or the UK or somewhere, but unfortunately those guys aren't on the slopes with you. And as much as they may have got that boot to fit pretty well, you know, they're good boot fitters, they're not in Austria then when you ski. And when those little things start to show, they're not there to adjust it. And the problem then is the ski shop will say, well, that's not my boot. You're going to have to pay for these adjustments now.
Yeah, I think if you're a holiday skier and you're going to buy a boot, buy it on your first day of your holiday, and you've got 6 days to make adjustments to that boot to make it a better fit for your foot. And then if you are coming to do a ski instructor course, clinics, whatever, buy it in resort, and then you've got the whole season to work with that shop to get the perfect fit. And most shops, especially in resorts, do a boot fit guarantee, so if the equipment that they've sold you initially doesn't work for you, they'll just change it for free along the way.
Absolutely. So look, we're concluding this long lecture here, but what's important from both Jamie and I's side, and I think Jamie now understands, I'm not telling you you need to do this to get the perfect fit. I'm putting the responsibility on each person. Jamie equally is saying, well, that's a bit unfair because people don't know recreational skiers. But I hope that they can use the information hidden here and ask some appropriate questions now when getting the boot fit.
Yes.
Jamie agrees with that. So, if you have any other information or want to just comment below, let us know and we'll see if we can answer it. We're very busy because the season started, so yeah, we'll do what we can, but we hope you learned something from this. Tune in for more and we'll see you soon with Ski Instructor Academy.
Don't have nightmares, guys.